The falling out between the brothers, in particular between Arthur and J.K., the fact that the cousins all hated each other, you know, Jim couldn't get along with any of the cousins. None of that gets into the media, and that's no accident. So.
Okay, so we're gonna go.
There's so many.
Charles, sorry, I'm just gonna say so I can keep track. Charles, yeah. Nicole, Lanaya, Andrew, then Abram.
I wasn't going to speak. My name is LeBlanc, Charles LeBlanc. I'm a blogger in this city, and I fought with the Irvings many years. There's so many stories, but there's one issue that I like just to say. It's called, when they say the Miramichi Leader, the Batters Norton Light, it's the Batters Irving paper, the St. John Irving paper, the Moncton Irving paper, the Campbellton Irving paper, the Edmundston Irving paper. Don't call it by the first name. I'd like to know what's your opinion when you have a committee that decides, like in what happened in Woodstock a few years ago, they decide to start their own papers, their own community paper, and the community says, wow, this is beautiful. The next thing you know, the Irvings goes there, give cheap advertisement, sometimes for free, and then they put that paper out of business, but the citizen always seems to support the Irving paper. Why is that now?
Why? Well, that's you know what happened to the Woodstock newspaper was very depressing because they did number. It was like you could call it a bit of a hit. You know, they sued him, they took him to court, they raided his offices, and then when he won in court, they put him out of business, as you say, by offering cheap advertising. I mean, part of the problem is that it has been always hard in this province creating an alternative media. When I was growing up in Fredericton in the 70s, there was very briefly an alternative newspaper. I can't remember what it was called.
The Plain Dealer.
Yes.
And the Mysterious East.
Years later, I think in the early 80s, I managed to find all the back copies of the Plain Dealer at the Harry Irving Library and went through them. And they did a lot of really, I mean, it was a strange newspaper, but they did a lot of fantastic stuff. But I was recruited as a boy to go and try to sell subscriptions in Fredericton to the Plain Dealer, and couldn't find anyone. I mean, they were happy to take the Daily Gleaner and the Telegraph Journal, but you know, so you know, I hate using words like passivity. That there's a passivity here because there's a passivity in lots of parts of the country. It's just not an issue here in New Brunswick, but. You know, to a certain, I think, you know, I mean, who knows? Possibly a lot of people who do get frustrated just eventually leave New Brunswick. But there is this issue that it's been hard to create alternative media to the Irvings, and the Woodstock example shows that even when you do, if they want to put you out of business, they can. You know, they have when you control. I mean, one of the things I didn't mention is that. The Irving economic model is called vertical integration, and it's where they control the entire chain of production.
But why is the community supporting them?
Sorry, just let me finish.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. And what that means is that if you're producing a newspaper, they grow the trees, they own the sawmill that cuts down the trees, they own the pulp and paper mill that turns the trees into paper, and then they own the newspaper. And that's the Irving model. And what that means is that when you control so much of the economy, the capacity to start another newspaper that has advertising, supported by advertising, is hard when all of the advertising is probably controlled by the Irvings. So I think it's not so much that people don't want alternative newspapers. I think it's just the economic capacity to do it is really difficult in this problem.
I guess this will be a bit of a follow-up to Charles. I didn't intend it to be, but that's good. My name's Nicole O'Byrne. I teach at the law faculty here at the University of New Brunswick. I moved here for a tenure-track job from Saskatchewan in 2009, and I was hired to teach Aboriginal law and economic development and self-government. So 6 weeks into my first seminar class, we're talking about economic development, natural resources, and that kind of thing. Monopoly capital, you know, all that stuff. And one of my students says, "Oh, you're talking about Irving Crown land." And my jaw just fell to the floor because I was like, what are you talking about? That's actually not a concept in law that anybody recognizes. Right? So, like, what is this? So
it might as well be Irving Crown.
It might as well be, and that's what I've actually learned the last 8 years that I've been here, is that there's some terms that have just settled into the political culture here, where a student of mine who's into his second university degree just says that as a term of reference, and everybody in the class seemed to know, except me, right? So we're kind of working on that, but I guess I'd just like to say thank you for writing this long series, because of course it's now on my reading list for my course.
Thank you.
Very helpful. But how do we continue to attract attention from outside of the province for people to come and cover the stories that are happening here? Because like Charles mentioned, it's hard to do it internally, but how do we keep the external interest going or sparking it or whatever? Thank you.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I was able to sell the idea of doing this initiative at the start of the Globe and then the series was because of Energy East. And Energy East was one of the pet projects of Irving Oil. It was going to connect the tar sands to St. John. At the moment, it looks like it's not going to happen, but who knows? So that was a good example of where here's an issue of sort of national interest that directly affects New Brunswick and the Irving interest. A story I'm hoping to do, which is also of national interest, is this massive shipbuilding contract that the Irvings have been given in Halifax, which is it appears to be the most unreviewed contract probably in history. And that too, I mean, that's because it's a federal government contract. It involves the Canadian Navy and the Irvings and the Maritimes, and that's the sort of story that will be of national interest. And in fact, it's already caused issues because the Vice Admiral of the Navy was relieved from his duties because he complained about the Irvings meddling with this building of these two ships in this Quebec shipyard. So the influence of the Irvings in Ottawa is very powerful, and so I think there are ways to attract interest. I think the other thing, and this sounds really depressing, but I think it's true, is that New Brunswick is you could call it neoliberalism in my mind. This is what happens when governments don't enact anti-combine laws, antitrust laws, is you end up in a situation like New Brunswick, where you have one or two corporations running entire economies. And this is now becoming, in the United States, there was a paper written, that came out of Princeton about 4 or 5 years ago, which said that basically, if you looked at all the data, the United States has become an oligarchy, which is whereby the corporate power is now so large and concentrated that the governments no longer represent the interests of the general population, which to you guys is old news.